In 2017, RuneScape's next big expansion was going to come with the most unique boss ever, but out of nowhere, it was silently cancelled. So what happened? And why do players refuse to let Jagex forget about it over 6 years later? This story actually begins even earlier than 6 years ago, all the way back in 2006. A Jagex staff member named Mod Maz was promoted to the role of content developer. I'd show you what she looks like, but in her almost decade and a half at the company, she never showed her face. So here's a picture of a RuneScape squirrel instead. That'll make more sense later. Maz and another developer, Mod Mark, soon began dreaming up a really interesting island expansion for RuneScape. The backstory behind this island is that a race of creatures called the Dragonkin found the island and decided to make it their home. Dragonkin are behind the creation of things like dragons, dragon armor, Zulrah, Hydra, really anything that's red or looks like a big lizard. So they like to make stuff, and this island is where they would conduct all of their experiments. As for what this island would offer to the player, I have something pretty cool for you. The original design document was actually sold by Jagex for a charity event and later published online by the player who bought it a few years back. And this thing was going to be absolutely huge. This island would basically be Jurassic Park, but with PlayStation 2 graphics. There would be a massive volcano, dinosaurs, tons of different biomes and landscapes, and most interesting of all, a unique training method for every skill in the game. Each training method would involve collecting fossils from the island in new and unique ways. You'd train strength by breaking boulders and unearthing ancient ruins, train agility by searching underwater, train thieving by pickpocketing fossil collectors, and so much more. You'd then bring these fossils to the Varrock Museum to assemble displays, or you could even construct some in your player-owned house. Coolest of all was that the largest skeleton you'd create would also become a boss. After fully assembling it, the skeleton would come to life and you'd have to defeat it. It gets way cooler than that, but I'm gonna save that for later. An island full of weird Dragonkin experiments that you theoretically never have to leave sounds pretty awesome and terrifying. Both Maz and Mark loved this project and wanted to find a way to bring it to life. But for 2006, it was really ambitious. There was no way they would be able to get the resources needed to bring something that massive to the game. But that didn't mean it couldn't exist in RuneScape's story, even if it didn't actually exist in the game. And in 2007, Maz saw her chance. Varrock was being reworked to the version we have today, as the team felt the old version was looking a bit dated. As part of this, the Varrock Museum would get a pretty massive upgrade that was assigned to Mod Maz. It went from a tiny 2-story building with a bunch of cool but useless stuff in it to a huge 3-story building full of lore and interactable scenery. Along with this came the kudos system. You could earn kudos by doing things like completing the museum quiz, cleaning ancient artifacts, and by talking with the historian about quests you've completed. Depending on how many kudos you have, you could then be rewarded XP by speaking to the museum's information clerk. The most interesting reward of all, however, was one that didn't exist yet. By speaking to the museum's curator, you'd learn that a barge was now being constructed north of the dig site. A new island had been found north of Mauritania, and once the barge was complete, the museum would be taking an expedition to it. You could come along too when it was done, but only if you had earned 100 kudos. If you hadn't guessed it yet, this was the island I talked about earlier. Players would soon nickname this island Kudos Island. Now, here's the thing. Jagex had no plans to actually complete Kudos Island anytime soon. Players didn't know it, but this wasn't a teaser for upcoming confirmed content. It was more like a reference to it. For the next few years, those barge workers would work on the barge day and night 24/7, but nothing ever changed. This only made people more curious, as the design document I discussed at the beginning wasn't public yet. Very little was actually known about what Kudos Island was. This led to it being asked about pretty much any chance the players could get over the next few years. In 2010, it seemed like something might actually be happening. A massive new island popped up north of Mauritania on the map, and by using the Orb of Oculus, you could see what looked like a campsite. Some players were certain that this was the long-awaited Kudos Island, but it just turned out to be Daemonheim, the place that players would train the soon-to-be-released dungeoneering skill. Players were now more curious about Kudos Island than ever, but still, nothing seemed to be happening. Over the next few years, it would pop up in multiple Q&As with Jagex, and every time the answer was, it's not happening yet, but maybe one day. About the best we got is in 2012, we learned the island's actual name was Fossil Island, because, well, as you know from the design document, it would have a lot of fossils on it. It was almost voted into RuneScape in a 2015 player power poll, but lost to another set of islands called the Ark. But 2015 would still be a very important year for Fossil Island. Mod Maz was moved from the RuneScape team to the old school RuneScape team. After joining, she would pitch Fossil Island to the team multiple times, and although it took a while, they eventually agreed. What really sold them on the idea was that Maz had planted the seed back in 2007. The barge was still being worked on, and although most had forgotten about it by now, Fossil Island was technically promised to the players all those years ago. Maz had finally gotten her wish. Fossil Island was actually happening. That is, if the players would allow it. Since everything in old school RuneScape is pulled before being worked on, if the players hated the idea, it could be over before development on it even started. Dinosaurs are cool and all, but that could be a tough sell for a medieval fantasy game. Plus, a project large enough to add training methods for every skill in the game could take actual years of development time, especially when the entire game only had 16 staff members at the time. So the island was changed quite a bit by Mod Maz, Mod Wolf, and Mod West to be more in line with what old school players would want and what the team could do. First, it was shrunk to a much more reasonable size without dinosaurs. It would contain brand new and unique training methods for hunter, mining, farming, herblore, slayer, agility, thieving, woodcutting, prayer, and fishing. Some of these methods even let you train 2 skills at the same time. Best of all, the players really helped out with this update too. Maz had put up a Reddit post asking players for their suggestions early in the development process, and a ton of them actually made it into the final design in some form. As for the fossils you would collect, you could turn them into the museum to build displays and earn XP lamps, or sacrifice your fossils for prayer XP, or trade them in for Fossil Island's currency, Numulite. When Jagex pulled Fossil Island soon after, everything passed by a huge margin, and it would launch just a few months later. Although the XP rates were a bit of a letdown, they were later changed, which made them not only interesting methods, but actually rewarding. Overall, Fossil Island was pretty well received, but it was still missing something pretty major: the boss. So Fossil Island technically has a boss, the deranged archaeologist, but he's really just a copy-paste of the crazy archaeologist from the wilderness. Aside from a slight mishap where Jagex tried to patch a safe spot and got the game's most popular hardcore Iron Man at the time killed, it's a pretty easy boss. So what happened to the skeleton boss that the player would have to build using fossils from the original design document? Well, this version of Fossil Island was supposed to get that too. It just wasn't going to be ready for the island's launch. So Fossil Island launched with a type of fossil called rare fossils. These fossils, as you probably guessed, are extremely rare, and you can earn them along with other fossils while training on the island. However, unlike other fossils, they do virtually nothing. You could turn them in for prayer XP or Numulite like every fossil, but you can't use them to construct any displays. But they're so rare, players didn't want to turn them in for 10 dragon bones worth of prayer XP if they were going to have an actual use later down the line. We would soon learn in a developer blog that they would, and that the actual use was going to be sick. One room in the Varrock Museum was left empty, and remains empty to this day. In this room, you were going to be able to construct your own boss using rare fossils like the original concept from 2006, but with a big twist. Maybe you clean some rare fossils and you get a dragon skull and a calphite arm. Use using these fossils, you would then build a boss that would come to life. You'd then jump from scaffolding to scaffolding, defeating each part of it so it doesn't break free. You'd fight the dragon skull, which would shoot fire and probably bite you. Then you'd have to fight the Calphite arm, which could poison you or maybe release smaller Calphites. Overall, it sounds just absolutely sick. We don't have anything in old school right now that I can think of that is even close to something like that. And although it wasn't supposed to be released when Fossil Island launched, according to developer blogs, it was supposed to come in the near future. So players waited, and they waited, and they waited. But the room stayed empty and rare fossils stayed useless. About a year after Fossil Island's launch, someone tweeted Maz to ask what was going on, and she informed everyone that it was sadly silently cancelled due to time constraints. To make matters worse, Mod Maz left Jagex about a year later too, but not before Mod Ash would create the squirrel on Fossil Island named Maz in her honor. Although she left the boss's design plans behind should the team ever want to use them, it's unlikely they ever will. Over the last 6 years, I've seen hundreds of posts reach the front of the 2007 Scape subreddit asking for this boss or for rare fossils to be at least given a use, but most were ignored. In September of 2022, a Reddit user named Slothy Potato was finally able to get the JMods to address it by posting terrible Fossil Island related jokes every day until they did. Why did the pirate set up camp on Fossil Island? Because he's an archaeologist. Unfortunately for Slothy, although they did address rare fossils being useless, it wasn't good news. Although the team is open to the idea of giving rare fossils a use, it seems that any approach besides giving players the boss they originally pitched would feel like a letdown. Imagine waiting all this time for what would be RuneScape's most unique boss yet, just to instead be able to use rare fossils for like an extra mushroom display or something. We've been waiting so long that even RuneScape 3 has Fossil Island now. I'm starting to understand how those barge workers must have felt. Regardless, the old school team doesn't want to tackle a project this large unless there's some serious interest from players about it. The only chance this boss has of ever getting made is if players show they actually want it. So next time the team wants ideas for future content or is doing a game jam or even just sending out a survey, don't forget about this boss. And don't forget to watch the video on the right. It's all about how big of a failure the continent of Zaya was on launch and how the team really turned it around. And don't forget to download Raid Shadow Legends using the QR code on screen or in the description below.